Last season, there was a rocket ship attached to her back, and she skyrocketed to another level of popularity. The brawl that we all know, the JC Sheldon headlock, I can't let you get close, Chael Sonnen moment. Sophie Cunningham instantly, jersey sold out.
Watch that moment again. Sophie Cunningham just made the announcement that could signal the beginning of the end for Unrivaled. Not because she's the biggest name in women's basketball, but because of who she represents. The casual fan, the viewer who doesn't follow every WNBA transaction but knows exactly who Sophie is after that JC Sheldon headlock moment went viral last season. Project B just landed their first signing that has people outside the hardcore basketball community asking where they can watch this league. And that's a problem for Napheesa Collier and Brianna Stewart, because their 3-on-3 experiment just lost the arms race in the most public way possible.
Power. You had Nneka Ogwumike. You had Alyssa Thomas. You had Jonquel Jones. Who? Jonquel. You had Jewel Lloyd, Camila Cardoso, Janelle Saloon, Kelsey Mitchell, Lee Mang, and now you have Sophie, the trophy.
Before Sophie, Project B had assembled a roster that looked impressive on paper. Nneka Ogwumike, the 2016 MVP and current Players Union president. Alyssa Thomas, the do-everything forward. Jewel Lloyd, coming off a strong playoff run. Kelsey Mitchell, who finished 5th in MVP voting in 2025. Camila Cardoso, the rookie center. Even Jonquel Jones, the former MVP. But here's the brutal reality of building a league in 2025. You don't need the best players. You need the most recognized players. And until Sophie Cunningham signed on November 27th, Project B didn't have anyone who could move the needle with casual fans. They had talent. They didn't have star power that translates to clicks, views, and social media engagement.
Video.
Guys, I'm so excited to announce that I'm actually joining Project B's athlete roster. I'm so thrilled for it. It is giving women's basketball a platform that is much deserving, not only here in the United States, but across the world. So come on this journey with us. Guys,
Notice how similar these announcements sound. Kelsey Mitchell talked about growing the game globally. Sophie's using almost identical language about women's basketball exploding in popularity and taking it worldwide. This isn't coincidence. Project B is handing these athletes a script, and they're all reading from the same playbook. But that corporate messaging actually reveals something important about Project B's strategy. They're not positioning this as an alternative to the WNBA. They're framing it as an expansion of opportunities for women's basketball. That's smart because it makes it harder for the WNBA to paint them as the villain trying to poach their talent.
Project B, their season runs with Unrivaled. The same time of year, Project B starts earlier, finishes a little later. Unrivaled runs in the middle of that. If you are in Project B, there is no way, shape, or form you are taking part in Unrivaled.
Here's where the schedule becomes absolutely critical. Project B runs from November to April. Unrivaled runs from January to March. The WNBA season typically runs May through October. If you sign with Project B, you physically cannot participate in Unrivaled. The timelines overlap completely. Sophie Cunningham just chose sides, and she chose the league offering over $2 million in annual salary, plus equity over the league offering 6-figure salaries to play 3-on-3 basketball in a high school gym in Miami. When you frame it that way, it's not even close. But the implications go way beyond Sophie's bank account.
She was one of the more popular WNBA players before Caitlin Clark joined the league. She was one of the more popular WNBA players before she joined the Indiana Fever last season. Last season, she hit another level. Last season, there was a rocket ship attached to her back, and she skyrocketed to another level of popularity. The brawl that we all know, the JC Sheldon headlock, I can't let you get close, Chael Sonnen moment. Sophie Cunningham instantly, jersey sold out. Followers rose to the roof. TikTok rose to the roof.
Let's talk about what happened to Sophie Cunningham in 2024 that makes her so valuable. She tore her MCL in August during her first season with the Indiana Fever. But before that injury, she had become one of the most talked about players in the league. Not because of her stats, although she's a solid three-point shooter, because of her personality and her willingness to play physical basketball. The moment that changed everything happened during a game against the Connecticut Sun. JC Sheldon put Sophie in a headlock during a scramble for the ball. Sophie's reaction, the viral clip, the "I can't let you get close" memes that followed. Her jerseys sold out within hours. Her social media following exploded. her TikTok presence went through the roof. That's the kind of organic star power you cannot manufacture. Sophie didn't become famous because the WNBA marketing department decided to push her. She became famous because she gave fans a moment they wanted to share. And Project B just signed the player who knows how to create those moments.
Article. See, Sophie signing I'm not mad about. Damn good player, but she was also never one of these WNBA players trying to play activists and women's rights, then playing in Saudi. She's realistically, and I can appreciate that. Very good point. So, Sophie Cunningham wasn't one of these players standing on her soapbox and screaming from the mountaintops about activism and this, that, and the third. She wasn't one of these fake WNBA activists turned player turned activists turned player.
The reaction from fans tells you everything you need to know about why this signing matters. One comment that stood out. Sophie signing I'm not mad about. She was never one of these WNBA players trying to play activist and women's rights then playing in Saudi. She's realistic and I can appreciate that. That's a direct shot at the players who've criticized the WNBA's pay structure, while simultaneously taking money from overseas leagues, including countries with questionable human rights records. Sophie never positioned herself as a social justice warrior. She never lectured fans about supporting women's basketball while making contradictory career choices. She just played hard, talked trash, and let her personality shine through. That authenticity is exactly what Project B needs, because the league is based in Saudi Arabia, and they know they're going to face criticism for that. Signing players who haven't spent years criticizing other leagues for their international partnerships gives them cover. Sophie can say I'm going to play basketball and get paid without being accused of hypocrisy.
High school gym. 3v3 in a high school gym. Unrivaled is... they're missing out. Right? You can't get Caitlin Clark. Angel Reese isn't playing. I mean, the next biggest name, realistically, is probably Sophie Cunningham in terms of who casuals in the public knows. Yeah, I know there's Asia Wilson, I know there's Sabrina, but we're talking about like biggest names and searched up names and clicked up names. And Sophie Cunningham's got to be hovering on the top of that list.
Now let's address the elephant in the room. Project B is not hiding the fact that they're trying to build a league that rivals the NBA for global supremacy. That's an ambitious goal that sounds almost laughable on the surface. But look at the money they're throwing around. Over $2 million per year for players, plus equity in the league. Compare that to the WNBA, where the Supermax last season paid under $300,000. The league still hasn't offered players a max salary over $1 million in their ongoing CBA negotiation. Yes, there are revenue-sharing incentives that could theoretically push salaries over $1 million, but those incentives require hitting targets for attendance, viewership, and merchandise sales that the league has never come close to reaching. The WNBA keeps dangling that carrot. You can make $1 million if you just bring in more fans. But they're asking players to do the league's marketing job, while paying them a fraction of what they could earn overseas.
It's nasty work, but it's the nature of the business. I get. Fan favorite Sophie Cunningham is coming to Project B. Get your popcorn. I will say this. Project B runs from November to April. The F1 season starts off in March. I do wonder if they're going to do anything for the Saudi Arabia race with some of these ladies from Project B with F1. I do wonder if there's some type of marketing opportunity there with that Jeddah race in F1 with the Project B ladies. I'm just saying, this is just...
Here's something most reporters aren't mentioning. Netika Ogwumike, who signed with Project B, is the president of the WNBA Players Association. She's currently at the negotiating table, trying to hammer out a new collective bargaining agreement with WNBA owners. And she just signed with a competing league that's offering salaries 7 times higher than what the WNBA pays. That's not just a conflict of interest. That's Netika walking into negotiations and essentially saying, I don't believe you're going to pay us what we're worth. So I've already found someone who will. How do you negotiate in good faith when the head of your union has one foot out the door? And it's not just Netika. Brianna Stewart, another prominent voice in CBA negotiations, co-founded Unrivaled. These players are hedging their bets by creating and joining alternative leagues, while simultaneously demanding the WNBA pay them more. The optics are terrible, but nobody in the media wants to point out this obvious contradiction.
Like that. How does this affect the WNBA? Realistically, it only affects the WNBA if there's a lockout. Realistically. Not a lockout. if players are saying, I'd much rather play in Project B and make the millions than play in the WNBA, right? Not a lockout. I lost my train of thought. It only affects the WNBA if the contracts are exclusive. There we go. Finally got it out. It only affects the WNBA if the Project B contracts are exclusive. It's if it's written and set in stone. If you play Project B, if the WNBA is back up.
Let's talk about what Project B is really selling. It's not just basketball. It's access to a market that American sports leagues have been trying to crack for decades. Saudi Arabia is investing billions of dollars into sports as part of their Vision 2030 initiative. To diversify their economy away from oil, they've brought in LEV Golf, which poached some of the PGA Tour's biggest stars with guaranteed contracts worth hundreds of millions. They're hosting Formula One races. They're buying soccer clubs. They're building a sports infrastructure designed to compete with Europe and North America. And now they want women's basketball. Not as a charity project or a PR stunt, but as a legitimate league that can attract top talent. The money they're offering isn't just about paying players. It's about making a statement that they're serious about building something that lasts.
The league is currently calling itself Project B. It plans to launch next fall with men's and women's 5-on-5 basketball. The women's players it has signed so far are big names getting big salaries that could shake up women's basketball across the globe. The league planned November to April schedule conflicts with Unrivaled and European leagues, but not the WNBA. Project B is luring players with what front office reports reported annual salaries over $2 million. The WNBA Supermax last year paid under $300,000, and the league has still not offered players a max salary over $1 million in its ongoing and contentious labor negotiations. Well, not technically, but there are incentives via rev sharing that if the players hit, they will be getting over $1 million. They just never hit those incentives to get the rev sharing that they are asking for.
The big question everyone's asking is whether Project B can land Caitlin Clark. Because if they can get Caitlin, this goes from an interesting experiment to a legitimate threat to the WNBA's dominance. Yahoo Sports put out an article suggesting that Sophie Cunningham's signing is part of a strategy to make Project B more appealing to Caitlin. Here's the logic. Caitlin and Sophie became teammates on the Indiana Fever in 2024. They developed a relationship on and off the court. Sophie's the kind of veteran presence that young stars gravitate toward because she's fun, she's authentic, and she doesn't take herself too seriously. If Project B can create a roster full of players that Caitlin actually wants to play with, that's a much stronger pitch than just throwing money at her. But there's a problem with this strategy. Caitlin Clark doesn't need the money the same way other WNBA players do. She's making tens of millions from endorsements with Nike, State Farm, and Gatorade. Her WNBA salary is almost irrelevant to her overall income. What Caitlin needs is to build her legacy, and you don't build a basketball legacy by leaving the WNBA for a startup league in Saudi Arabia, no matter how much they pay you.
They need to reach to go get that. It's not really that tough. The players are also receiving equity in the new league, as an increasingly common in emerging leagues. Yeah, because new leagues need to get off the ground, so they're going to go above and beyond offering some bullshit. Of course, although Nneka Ogwumike, Alyssa Thomas, Jonquel Jones, Jonquel Jones, Jewel Lloyd, Sophie Cunningham, Camila Cardoso, Lee Meng, Janelle Saloon, and Kelsey Mitchell. Ogwumike, Thomas Jones, and Mitchell are blue chip WNBA stars.
Now let's address how this affects Unrivaled, because that's where this gets really interesting. Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier launched Unrivaled as a way to keep top WNBA players in the United States during the off-season. Instead of going overseas, the pitch was simple. Play 3-on-3 basketball in Miami, make 6 figures for 2 months of work, and you don't have to fly to Turkey or China to supplement your WNBA income. It's a good idea in theory, but Project B just exposed the fundamental flaw in Unrivaled's business model. If you're going to ask players to stay in the US during the off-season, you need to pay them what they could make overseas, and Unrivaled's 6-figure salaries don't come close to competing with Project B's $2 million contracts. Unrivaled has signed some big names. They've got Asia Wilson, Sabrina Ionescu, Breanna Stewart, Nafisa Collier. But they're missing Caitlin Clark, who declined to participate. They're missing Angel Reese, who's sitting out due to injury. And now they're losing players like Sophie Cunningham to Project B before Unrivaled even tips off their first season.
Reporters and journalists leave out. I have not seen anybody report the clear conflict of interest that's going on within negotiations between with the CBA, between the players and the owners, between Ogwumike and the owners, between Fee and Bree and the owners. I have yet to see anybody point out the blatant conflict of interest. But they'll fluff this shit up though, right? They'll fluff it up. The league announced Mitchell on November 24th. She broke out in 2025, leading the Fever on a long playoff run despite an injury to Caitlin Clark. She finished 5th in MVP voting. Lloyd, blah, blah, blah. Jones, blah, blah, blah. Cunningham tore her MCL in August in her first season with the Indiana Fever and is, like most WNBA veterans, a free agent.
Here's what nobody's talking about. Sophie Cunningham, like most WNBA veterans, is currently a free agent. Her contract with the Indiana Fever expired, and she's negotiating a new deal. But what happens if the WNBA goes into a lockout because they can't reach an agreement on the new CBA? That's not a hypothetical. The current CBA expires soon, and the negotiations are contentious. Players are demanding higher salaries, better revenue sharing, and improved working conditions. Owners are pushing back, saying the league isn't profitable enough to justify those increases. If they can't reach a deal, the 2025 WNBA season could be delayed or canceled entirely. And if that happens, Project B becomes a lot more attractive to a lot more players. Because suddenly it's not about choosing between the WNBA and Project B. It's about having a place to play professional basketball and get paid while the WNBA sorts out its labor dispute. Project B could position itself as the savior of women's basketball, giving players an alternative when their primary league is shut down. Here's what makes Sophie Cunningham's decision particularly significant for the future of women's basketball. She represents a new generation of WNBA players who aren't bound by loyalty to the league that drafted them. She's not one of the old guard who remembers when the WNBA was the only option for American women who wanted to play professional basketball at home. Sophie came into a league where overseas opportunities were already well established. She watched veterans make more money playing in Turkey, Russia, and China than they made in the WNBA. She saw the league struggle to market its stars effectively. She experienced firsthand how the WNBA's salary structure forces even all-star caliber players to choose between financial security and staying in the United States year-round. And now she's watching new leagues pop up offering salaries that dwarf what the WNBA pays. Project B is offering over $2 million annually. Unrivaled is offering 6 figures for 2 months of 3-on-3 basketball. Meanwhile, the WNBA is still negotiating whether to offer max contracts over $1 million, with most of that money tied to revenue-sharing incentives that players have never been able to unlock. From Sophie's perspective, this isn't about betraying the WNBA. It's about making a rational business decision. She's 28 years old. She's coming off an MCL tear. She's a free agent with no guaranteed contract. And someone just offered her generational wealth to play basketball for 6 months in Saudi Arabia. The fact that she didn't hesitate, the fact that she made this announcement with enthusiasm and zero apologies, tells you everything about where the leverage sits in women's basketball right now. It's not with the WNBA, it's with the players who have options. Now let's talk about what this means for the WNBA's negotiating position. The league has been operating under the assumption that they're the premier destination for women's basketball, and that gives them leverage in CBA negotiations. They've been telling players you want more money, prove you can draw fans and generate revenue. But Project B just called their bluff. Because now players can say, you won't pay us what we're worth? Fine. We'll go play for someone who will. And suddenly the WNBA isn't negotiating from a position of strength anymore. They're negotiating against the reality that their players have legitimate alternatives that pay significantly better. This is especially problematic for the WNBA because of the timing. The current CBA is expiring right as Project B is ramping up. If the WNBA can't reach a deal with the players' union and the season gets delayed, Project B becomes the default option for dozens of players who need somewhere to play. And once those players experience what it's like to make $2 million for 6 months of work, how many of them are going to want to come back to the WNBA for $300,000? The WNBA owners have to be looking at this situation and realizing they're in serious trouble. Because they can't compete with Project B on salary. The WNBA isn't profitable enough to pay players $2 million a year. The league has never turned a consistent profit, and it relies on subsidies from the NBA to stay afloat.